So good afternoon and good morning, everybody, wherever you are today. Really nice to see so many people join again today. Numbers were a little bit low. It's coming towards the end of year. A lot of people are kind of doing that 2020 reset, thinking about 2023. But at the last minute, we saw lots of people accept the invitation. So it's lovely to see so many people join us today. My name's Al Heron. Of course, we're with our resident expert, Michael Nordstrom, and we are looking at driving performance, speed and quality. So we'll be looking at some of the enhancements that we've made to product. I think what we're going to do, and we're going to hand over to Michael very, very soon. We are also talking about simple and some key hands-on lessons that we can have to drive performance right now. So we'll be looking at that, and then we'll also be looking at some of the improvements that we'll be pushing out into next year. A couple of housekeeping items before we get going. We're going to record this, so we always get the question from someone. This is great. Are you going to record? So we'll record this. We'll send that out to everyone that's registered. And please feel free. It's you can share that out amongst your teams. The other thing is, and I always enjoy saying this, for all of 2022, we've not been able to give Michael a question he's not been able to answer. Can we do it? Final session of the year. But no, on a more serious note, this is an interactive session. It's live. We're live. So please use the question, the Q&A function, and get any questions that you want across to Michael. Michael, at that point, I think this is so jam-packed, we wanted to do a shorter intro to you, but the floor is yours, Michael.
Great, thank you very much. And even though this is a short one, here is the agenda for what we're going to cover in these next 13 minutes. We will be talking about the performance chain and how things have an impact on the performance in Qlik. We will talk about more specifically about data modeling, the scripting and expressions, about obviously the Vizlib extensions and the considerations that we have there, and then a little bit about the future, what we're going to do next. So that's the agenda. We're going to start very easy with something what you haven't seen in a long time, which is HW, which means hardware. So actually, when we start looking at the chain of performance and what we do in order to make performance good in Qlik, it all starts actually with the hardware, the actual computer that's there somewhere. And on top of that, we have the BIOS, we have the operating system and the settings, and all these sort of that you might not think of, all these things actually have an impact on the performance. It's even so that when we look at hardware, when I've been discussing this with the experts around installations and Qlik servers, even things like where you position ROM memory slots in the server has an impact on the performance of Qlik, because it's so computation intensive in terms of communicating between the ROM memories and the CPU inside the computer itself. So we're going to get less technical, less hardware. We're going up in this chain and looking at the Qlik setup. How Qlik is set up definitely has an impact. Things like, do we have a multi-node environment? Is it set up with certain parameters, timeouts, all of these settings? Then we're getting closer to what probably most of you on this call work with, which is the Qlik app and the data model and how we work within the data model. Then the calculations, measures, how we combine dimensions and measures, the actual calculations inside the application. All of these things that we've been looking at now, all of that comes from calculations on the Qlik engine side. So none of this really has an impact on the user in terms of the user browser or the user computer. This is just settings that's on the server and things that happen on the server. So if you make a more complex calculation, if you have a bad data model, it has an impact on the server side that then sort of propagates over to the user, but it's not really on the user machine. However, this last bit with the layout, where also the extensions come in, now we typically have two things that impact the performance in the actual layout, apart from what's below, and that's the loading of the code. So we actually load the extension into Qlik, that as in sort of there's a piece of code that runs the extension that's loaded either from the Qlik server, or if you have an online extension, that's loaded from our servers. So then it actually loads a little piece of code from the Qlik server and a bigger chunk of code from our servers. And actually, if it's faster loading from our servers or the Qlik server, it actually depends a little bit. So it's not a super clear answer to which one is faster there. And we'll get back to that a little bit later. So these are the things that impacts performance. If one of these things is set up wrong, then your ClickUp will be slower and it won't work the way that you want it to work. So we won't go all the way back to the actual hardware and the setup. I think that's a little bit too technical. I'm definitely not the right person to sort of instruct people on how to set up a QlikSense server. But I do know a bit about data modeling in Qlik and how we create a good data model. So just to give you a better idea, I've set up 3 different data models, like type models, if you call them. These 3 data models are then compared to a number of different things, which has an impact. And so the data models has an impact on the RAM consumption, the memory consumption, the script complexity, how complex of a script do I need to write, what's the load time, how long does it take to load the app with new data, how is the response time, so how quick can I get answers inside the user interface, how interactive can I make my dashboards and still get a quick response time? And then the administration and development time to create these things. So you can't get all of these things perfect by choosing one data model, but we can choose one that does these things in general better. So if we look at this first data model, actually, well, I'll hide those for a bit and talk about the data model first. When we look at this data model, this is something that I see very often when I have a customer that comes in with a request or a question around performance. And it's one that has multiple big transaction tables. That's what this is supposed to describe. So you typically have something like a link table in the middle that connects multiple transactional tables together. Qlik is relatively slow at handling this at the front end. Obviously, the real data model that I've seen with customers is typically a lot bigger than this and even have hundreds of tables and thousands of fields, worst case. And it's one thing if this is an intentional link table, this might actually work okay, but many times it's even disjointed in the sense that it's different data models all just packed into one app. So the thing with that is that it's actually not that bad on RAM consumption when it just loads. The script complexity is easy, which is usually why we see this, because they come from developers just putting the data in, and this is what comes out. And the load time loading data into app is also going to be relatively quick. However, the response time once doing calculations inside the app or creating charts is going to be horrible. It will be super, super slow. And the administration and development of this usually becomes worse. And usually one way to identify this type of data model, apart from looking at it and seeing the big tables, is that when you have a development of an app and it goes really fast in the beginning, but then it starts going really slow and everything becomes really complex. And when you make changes, everything breaks. Then you've probably done a data model like that. Not to be recommended, despite the 3 happy smiley faces on that one. The middle one with one transactional table and a few tables, typically a star schema. It can have longer arms, like a snowflake schema. It's also okay, but it will still have one transactional table. This will actually use a little bit more of RAM memory in the machine that runs it. But the upside of this is that you'll get a quicker response time, and the administration and development will be a lot easier because the calculations that you make will be much simpler and easier to understand when you stick to a sort of a proper data model like this. The last one is like the very extreme, and I've seen this with some solutions where you need the absolute best calculation response time performance. Then you can actually create everything into one big table and Qlik. And this is something that Qlik will typically do. It will be the fastest one in terms of response time, but also now it becomes really difficult to build, really bad for all the other things apart from just that response time. But the most efficient one from a calculation perspective will be just one table in Qlik. The middle one is definitely the one that's preferred and the one that you typically should be using. If you have the one on the left, you do most likely have a problem with performance in your Qlik Sense apps. So to summarize that a little bit, it's usually the CPU calculation time versus the use of memory, RAM. So the complex model, more CPU power, and it will have slower front-end calculations. The simple one-fact table model will require less CPU, might require a bit more RAM. This is a little bit tricky one because it will actually potentially use less RAM again once you start adding calculations to it. But if you look at it from the start, it might look like it's using a little bit more RAM memory. So that's about the data models. If we look at the scripting and the expressions inside the app, one super important thing, if a calculation does not change on selections, always put that calculation inside the script. A lot of times we see creations of very long, very complex calculations in expressions measures, and they don't have to be there. It can already be done inside the script. The other thing is to calculate outside the aggregation when possible. And I put an example in. So there's a huge difference in Qlik. If you do sum of expression times currency versus sum of expression times currency, which might look very, very similar, and it's a super simple example. Obviously, many times it will be more complex. The point of this is that if we do the one on the right and we have 1,000,000 rows, we will do 1,000,000 operations of expression one times currency. Whereas on the left, we will only do that multiplication once. So the factor between those two calculations on an extreme is 1 to 1,000,000. And I still see this a lot. So always make sure that you have the aggregation outside of the expression whenever possible. Now, for Vizlib and the considerations that we have here, when do you actually need a calculation? I see a lot of calculations are done, for example, to decide a color where we don't really need to do a calculation, but we're still using a calculation. Everything that we do in terms of calculations inside our extensions, be that to show a value or to show a certain color, that calculation requires computation time from Qlik Sense. So Qlik will have to calculate that value, and you're asking Qlik to do it. This is also something that we see often when people are comparing perhaps our extension to a native object and they feel like it's slower. And then once you start adding all those other calculations that you're actually doing just to create the layout, the performance is relatively similar because all the calculations are done on the Qlik server. So that's one thing. The other thing is to use the right calculation for the job. For example, if you can use a table, then use the table and don't use the KPI designer. Don't try to create a table using 100 different objects inside the KPI designer, which is, by the way, a super great tool for doing advanced things and advanced analytics and layouts in your analytics apps, but it's not great for displaying table data. So if you can use a table, that's going to be a lot quicker, simply because we don't ask for Qlik for so many things. And in the case of KPI designer, also because we don't have to render so many different objects. The table will just render a table. Still some nice little visualizations, but it will be much quicker because it's doing more or less the same thing over and over. Whereas in the KPI designer, they would be individual objects. So choose the right extension for the job. Look at all the ones that you have. We usually have good alternatives, and ask our support if you need help on that. Minimize the number of objects. So this goes to sort of sometimes it even is a limitation on the browser side. Like if you have slow browsers, it will actually take time to render. And make sure you keep track of the version of our extensions. We do constantly update them. You can have a pretty long backwards compatibility. So even if you're on November 21 of Qlik, you don't have to stay on our old extensions. You can go with a much newer version of our extensions. As long as the extensions are of a newer version than Qlik, it usually works very, very well. So be careful. Don't stay on old versions just because you're staying on old versions of Qlik. There's no need. And decide whether you want to use online or offline extensions. Sometimes one is better, sometimes the other is better. With ClickSauce, we've seen that online is actually usually a lot better, simply because ClickSauce for some reason is super slow at collecting the extension code from the ClickSauce engine and displaying it to you as a user, whereas our servers do that a lot quicker. It's just a tiny bit of code, so it shouldn't take that long, but it does in ClickSauce, so try online if you're on ClickSauce. Now, 2023, what's happening next? We will have a big stability and performance focus for the next year, simply because many of our extensions are now quite mature. They already have a lot of the functionality that you need, so we can focus on tweaking them, improving them, adding better performance. Of course, we'll still add quite a few other things, but this we will do, but by decreasing the size of the extension. So, for example, in ClickSauce, where we've seen that slow loading, even changing so that it's half a megabyte smaller will actually make a difference. We didn't see that so much with the servers before, but we see it now. The other thing is to improve the code, just so that we can visualize it faster. Some of the extensions are older, and we now have newer ways of coding that we can do this in a better way. There's new libraries, there's new ways that we can use technically to make it faster. And of course, feature requests, and this is a super important one. We will have we will really listen to your feature requests, and we will really try to implement a lot of sort of the last few things that our customers are asking for now to make sure that the products become even more complete. So make sure you enter your feature requests on our website. And we will also during next year run product extension specific webinars on performance, so that you will learn how to do better load time performance in collaboration, or how to build better tiles applications with many objects without losing performance. So we will get back to having specific webinars on performance in apps for specific extensions. So with that, make sure that you tell us what you need. Post your comments, thoughts, ideas, everything in the Q&A so that we can pick it up from there. And I'm going to open up. I'm a bit over time, but I'm going to still open up for questions. Just do a quick one. If Al has seen anything that looks super important that you think that we should pick up on? No, can't hear you, Al.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I got a couple that come straight in. Thanks for that, though. Cool to see that summary about our pivot into 2023, and also, keep those feature requests coming. Ryan asks, and this was before you touched on ClickSauce, but does Vizlib support ClickSauce? We already have the product and the on-prem auto update functionality. In our example, we'll be setting up a hybrid tenant to complement our existing on-prem AWS environment.
Yes. So yes, they work in ClickSauce and work perfectly well. You can use, as I said, I recommend using the online simply because it's going to be a little bit faster in ClickSauce. You do still have a couple of limitations. We do have a page on exactly what limitations that is. I think we can send that out afterwards. So we'll try to send out a link to that page where we have the limitations. Those are typically now on the Click side. So the biggest one being exports to PDF and image from third-party extensions don't work on ClickSauce. Click is very much aware of this. They need a bit of more push to allow us to do that. That would make all our lives a lot easier, I think. But other than that, most things just work the same, so it's not a huge difference. We do have to remember it's a different product, but no, it's not a huge difference.
Yeah. And key, I think you touched on this, Michael, as well, but we will be announcing later this month our improved NPS scores. So that's really important. We talked about being a product company and feature requests, but actually NPS is something we monitor. So don't forget to keep on sending those, and we'll have some announcements about how we've improved on those later in this month. Amit asks, we are on a multi-node environment. We have 2 users using the same Click app, but they have been directed to the 2 different servers. One of the users can see the Viz components, the other cannot. Is this a Click issue or a Viz issue? It says too much detail for this call, but not too much detail for Michael.
This definitely sounds like something for our support to handle. It's probably more of a network issue or a security setup issue. So either one of those, I think it could be. We have many customers on multi-node, so that's not a problem in itself. It's just that there's probably something wrong.
Yeah.
So send it into our support; they will help.
Send it to support. Yeah. Okay. From Anonymous, Pivot Table lost its functionalities from ClickView to ClickSense. With Vizlib planning to bring back those ClickView functionalities as ClickSense is not bringing them, and we use on-prem. Does that make sense to you, Michael? Do you want me to repeat that? Or?
No, it makes sense. I'm just thinking that I can't think of what functionality is still left to add from ClickView to ClickSense. There used to be some things that weren't in ClickSense or in our extensions. Please do let us know exactly what type of functionality that is and how that is. We're not planning to sort of create a huge amount of new things in Pivot Table. We don't get a lot of requests there. But no, if there's something that we can do, then yeah, happy to hear it. And ClickView and ClickSense actually use the same engine, so things that were possible to do in ClickSense in ClickView typically are possible in ClickSense as well. But there might be something that I'm missing there. Let us know exactly what it is.
Quick hello from a Mr. Israel, but I won't repeat his question. And then Steve, hi Al, thanks Michael. A quick push again for click on export PDF, but that's I think we've had that as a reminder. Good to see so many people returning and joining us again. From Surrender. Is it possible? Is there any possibility you got high availability Vizlib server?
I think by that you mean the ability to sort of have redundant servers and fallback servers. Currently not. It's something that we might consider in the future. Right now you need to spin a new one up in order to, so there is a bit of downtime still in how you would work with that. So no, not really, but could be something that we consider in the future, definitely.
Lovely. We've actually gone through all of we've answered everyone. Michael, we're at 22 minutes past. So again, always thank you for your time. You've got a couple of
just a final recommendation. So if you're at all interested in performance in Click, this will sound like a super technical thing. Click Under the Hood by Henrik Kronström, famously known as Hick. Watch this video. It's actually a great sort of explanation of how Click works and how it does its calculations, which means that you will definitely improve your Click apps after you watch that.
Lovely. And what we'll do, because that was just in case you can't grab it or you didn't get the name, we'll add it to the email we'll send out. We'll get that out on the email. So don't fear if you haven't seen that. Thanks from both of us. We you know, it's been a real pleasure kind of meeting and seeing so many people regularly join us, not only for these bite size but for the longer webinars. Wish you all a very happy kind of couple of weeks down if you have that, wherever you are in the world. So we hope the rest of your 2022 goes very well. We will be doing some big announcements. It's going to be really exciting into January, and that's all I'm going to say for now. Yeah, do look out, watch out for emails in from us, and we hope to see you all again in January and then ongoing. For myself and for Michael, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Bye.